Carnival Row is certainly a beast of a show. The best way to describe this show is by its mix of genres: steampunk, neo-noir with fantasy and politics.
In the realms of fantasy, it includes a variety of magical creatures. All of the magical creatures are called fae. This word doesn't just mean fairies, but faun, called pucks in universe, though this may be a slur, centaurs and the like too. They're often called critch, which is the in-universe slur for them.
Quick warning for spoilers as I'm about to outline the plot of the show, and there are minor spoilers for later episodes dotted throughout the review. This season of Carnival Row primarily focused on Vignette's arrival to the Burg and her trouble settling in, as well as Rycroft Philostrate's investigations into a series of murders that appear to be related. Vignette and Philo are ex-lovers who met during the Great War in Ternanock, so there's a lot of tension and will they won't they get back together. At the same time, there are two key subplots. Two political families are in conflict, the Breakspears and the Longerbanes. Absalom Breakspear is the current Chancellor of the Burg and becomes disturbed when his son Jonah is suddenly kidnapped. His wife Piety, of course, believes that his rival, Ritter Longerbane, is to blame. The couple work together to retrieve their son safely. In an influential area of the Burg, Miss Imogen Spurnrose is excited that one of the nearby houses has been bought. She and her brother Ezra are horrified to learn that their new rich neighbour, Mr. Agrieus, is a faun. Imogen then learns that Ezra has squandered the family fortune, so she works with Mr. Agrieus, helping him become a member of high society in return for his financial support in a new business venture of Ezra's.
The show kind of throws you into the deep end straight away. It really takes time to learn the character names and understand all of the terms, lore, and what it means. This is to the show's benefit, with not spoon-feeding everything, as we know a lot of shows suffer from telling instead of showing. However, it's clear that there's a lot of lore to the show, making it very hard to process at the beginning. But it's interesting nonetheless, giving the idea of a very large and developed world. It was only by sticking with the show that we started to understand the meaning of certain words in the context of this universe. With the large cast of characters, it's hard to keep track, which makes it hard to understand each separate plot and how the characters link in with one another. In fact, the story with Imogen and Agrieus feels very disconnected from the rest of the story, that it could have potentially been its own thing.
Due to the mix of genres that the show has, it does come off a bit messy in its execution. For a steampunk show, there's not too much of that currently. The most we see is some sort of train line being built and Agrieus' prototype electric lamp. The costumes didn't stand out very much, though the police uniforms, as well as Imogen's and Agrieus' costumes, are very nice. The CG is good and the fairy wings are very pretty, though there's not much that separates the fairy costuming from the humans, especially in the working class. The makeup for the fae is also very nice. Anyway, the true focus of the show is neo-noir and politics, though the crossover between the two doesn't work out so well. The show seems to be trying to be a Victorian-inspired Game of Thrones, with all of the characters, plots, and nudity. It's very fumbly with this. Only at certain parts do you finally realise why a particular character was introduced so early, when they had so little bearing on everything else. Apart from a few, the sex scenes and nudity seem to be there to make the show be more adult and bump up the age rating. The show also isn't very subtle with its metaphors and allusions to the real world, so if you don't like real-life political allusions and debate about racism and such, avoid the show like the plague.
It's very hard at points to see what is happening, as the show is one of those that has decided that dark means you can't see shit. We felt like we had to turn the brightness all the way up just to see what was happening. We get that a lot of it is set at night, but still, we need to see what is going on. It was that bad that we had to replay parts of the first episode just so we knew what had happened.
It's a hard pilot episode to get through with all that's thrown at you, and all of the characters introduced. By the end of our first viewing, while we liked some of the ideas, we felt a little unsatisfied. We barely remembered any character names, bar vignettes, as they were quite complicated, and felt the whole Unseelie Jack story fell flat at the end with a very generic warning speech about things to come. Woo. We were looking forward to seeing Orlando Bloom's Inspector, who obviously we later figured out was called Rycroft Philostrate, and Mignette reuniting, and seeing the fallout of that, but that was sadly an end of episode thing.
You need to get past the tepid first episode to get into the interesting meat of the show. The murder mystery for the rest of the show is much more interesting with better pacing. The show is still bloated with a few too many characters, some of which we barely see and have little relevance until the end, i.e. the politician families, Longerbane and Breakspear. It's very clear that the show was built to have an overarching plot, so the first episode, trying to be self-contained, didn't really work.
The show then suddenly cuts to a flashback episode for the third episode, Kingdoms of the Moon. While it was a good and interesting episode setting up Vignette and Philo's past and the history that the show alluded to at the start, the Great War, the sudden cut to the present at the end didn't work well and didn't mesh well with what occurred in the last episode. I would have preferred them to have kept it as a flashback-only episode. I feel this episode could have worked better perhaps as the second episode of the show as a whole, to keep the focus on the murder mystery and everyone else's stories developing without a sudden break in narrative, just to explain the backstory of two key characters. It really would have made sense for Kingdoms of the Moon to have been episode 2, as it would have occurred directly after Philo and Vignette reunited and explains the whole rift between the ex-lovers. I can understand why it became episode 3 though, since the second episode, Aisling, was a lot more clearer and entertaining than the first.
The season ends with an even more interesting plot of division and conflict teased, though we hope there's a little more focus on the other characters in a new season, as there is little that they can do now with Vignette and Philo. Lime doesn't personally see them as main character material for season 2, which has been confirmed as in production. Vignette's story, now that we think about it, didn't actually have much forward momentum. She did things and then it meant nothing by the next episode. Her story seemed really to revolve around her hating and loving Philo.
There was one twist at the end of the show that I felt was very unneeded, as it did nothing for the characters except make you feel bad that you wanted that pair together to begin with, because we really needed more Game of Thrones within this show. Overall, the show is a bit of a mess, but enjoyable overall. It does feel like it's trying to be the next big adult fantasy show, and I feel like it's trying too hard to do too much at once.
So, do Lime and Dragon recommend this show? Of course we do. Though we do send warnings that it is a struggle to get into at the start and can at times be a little predictable.
Thank you very much for watching. Like and subscribe. We love you very much. And we'll see you next time in our next video. Lime out.
Dragon out.
Now you can plug the Patreon. Take it away, Dragon.
Don't forget, if you wish to support us further, go onto our Patreon, link in the description, and become one of our most helpful beans.
Beans! Join the Bean Army. You could even become the Precious. Yes! Yes, I'm happy with that being on the internet.
Yes, I'm aware you are.
I love Lord of the Rings. I love my
Yes, I do
Gollum.
too, but I can't do